Well, I want to welcome you all again and take the time to welcome our online audience. We want to say Happy New Year to you, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. For those of you that are in the room with me, for some of you, this is your second sermon because you were in morning service. But I am happy to see all of you. Today we're going to be embarking on a 8-week series that we're going to be calling Blessed. It could be 9 weeks, and I say that because depending on the translation that you read of the verses we'll be focusing on today, it could be 9 sayings. Some say 8, depending on the translation, 9. But I think I'm going to be able to get it into 8. So we're going to start an 8-week series called Blessed. And since probably the new year almost started, so let's say the first week of December, I usually start asking the Lord, what am I supposed to talk to whatever congregation or whatever church that I'm at the time as the new year embarks, what am I supposed to be talking to them about? Now last year, Cam had brought up the beatitudes to me, but his schedule didn't really permit, and God kind of led us elsewhere as the year ended. But as the year began, here we are at the beatitudes. So the Beatitudes are going to be the theme pretty much out of the 8-week series we're going to do. That's what the series is going to run off of. Each week, we will cover one of the Beatitudes and take a closer look at them rather than just looking at all 8 of them as a whole. So at the beginning of each week, I'm going to read them in full to you, and then we'll focus in on the one we will for today. So this is the way it reads in Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. I'm reading in the New King James Version. It reads this way: "And seeing the multitudes, he," meaning Jesus, "went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely, for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The Beatitudes are also known as the Sermon on the Mount. You will hear some also call them this. There are also sayings. Some will also call them that. In particular, 8, depending on the translation, as I said earlier. In particularly, blessings that our Lord lists. He goes on to talk about people in the family of God who are blessed. And these can also be known as principles to the Christian life. It's often said that chapter 5 is about those who are blessed, and chapters 6 and 7 show us how to live like those people. The sermon actually spans 3 chapters long, chapters 5, 6, and 7. Now, this is said to be Jesus' first sermon, and it is his first long-standing sermon. Other theologians or Christian scholars will argue that his first sermon was actually in the temple when he was a guest speaker of the day and he rolled the scrolls of Isaiah. Which, by the way, I love this argument, because while they argue that that was in fact Jesus' first sermon, they also go on record to argue that it was the shortest sermon in history. But the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' largest crowd and his first long-standing sermon. As we go through these 8 and a half weeks. We'll look at each one, and today we'll focus on the very first one that Jesus leads with. Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. Now this is in the Amplified Version. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed," meaning spiritually prosperous or happy, or someone to be admired. Remember, this is in the Amplified Version. "Are the poor in spirit," meaning those who are devoid of spiritual arrogance, those who regard themselves as insignificant. "For theirs is the kingdom of heaven, both now and forever." The first time I read this first beatitude, I have to be honest, poor in spirit was very confusing for me. Of course, immediately the first thing I went to was monetary value. And I thought of someone maybe perhaps who doesn't have much money. But as I read and studied the word, in fact, this is not what Jesus is talking about. I actually love the way the Enduring Word commentary reads it. And this is not going to pop up on the screen for you. I'm going to read it slowly. And I love the breakdown of the way the Enduring Word breaks down what the poor in spirit is. So hear this. The poor in spirit, this is not a man's confession that he is by nature insignificant or personally without value, for that would be untrue. Instead, it is a confession that he is sinful and rebellious and utterly without moral virtues adequate to commend him to God. I thought that first part was very powerful because it talks about that there's some awareness there. It talks about that the poor in spirit is very much aware of how offensive the sinful nature is to God. It goes on to say the poor in spirit recognize they have no spiritual assets. Now, for those who have any type of financial literacy, we know what assets are. This is something that is of value, something that is of value to us, that we could perhaps sell off, trade off, but either way, it's of some type of value. So the poor in spirit, they recognize they have no spiritual assets. They know they are spiritually bankrupt. I love this part. It says, we could say the ancient Greek has a word for the working poor and a word for the truly poor. Jesus would have been using the word for the truly poor in this instance when it comes to the poor in spirit. So they're saying in the commentary, in the ancient Greek, there were two words set up. One word meant a working class that was poor, but then there was another word that meant someone who would be truly poor. When it comes to the poor in spirit, that's what Jesus is referring to, the person who is truly poor. It indicates someone who must beg for whatever they have or whatever they may get. And watch this. This can be a struggle for someone because there's no room for pride here. The poor in spirit, they're keenly aware of this. So someone may say, Q, how do I know if I'm not the poor in spirit? And I would say that's fairly an easy question. You think your accolades matter to God. Or you think your behavior or what you do adds some type of value to what you do for God. Think of it this way, a person that may say something like, well, I always come to church. Or I always try to come to church. I always serve. Or they may say something like, I'm honored in all the rooms that I go in. I work hard to be recognized where I am. And it may go on, but can I just be honest? This is not poor in spirit. The Enduring Word Commentary goes on to say, poverty of spirit cannot be artificially induced by self-hatred. The Holy Spirit and our response to his workings in our hearts bring this about. So the commentary is saying that a person can't really go on a woe is me rant talking about how bad I am, and that would produce an attitude of poor in spirit. That actually wouldn't work. It actually says that the workings of the Holy Spirit is what brings this about. I love this. It says the first beatitude is where we start with God. So think of a ladder. This is the first and foundational step. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The commentary went on to say how it would have been, watch this, a grievous discouragement to the struggling faith if the first step was blessing to the pure in heart. I love that. It says that God is so smart that he would have never started out in that order, because he knows how offensive, how hurtful, how discouraging it would have been to someone who struggles with faith. I could go on to say, if blessed are the pure in heart was the foundational step, so much more innocence would be required. I don't think anybody would argue with me about that. Everyone can start at this foundational step. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And I love that it's not blessed are the pure, blessed are the holy, blessed are the wonderful. No, blessed are the poor in spirit. And the commentary does go on to say that. It goes on to say it's not what we have, but it's about what we don't have. It's the first point of contact between our souls and God. It goes on to talk about why the poor in spirit receive the kingdom of heaven. Because this is a promise that Jesus gives the poor in spirit. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So it says this, they receive the kingdom of heaven because those poor in spirit, those who understand it, those who understand that they have to beg, they also are rewarded. They receive the kingdom of heaven because poverty of spirit is an absolute prerequisite for receiving the kingdom of heaven. I remember the first time I heard the word prerequisite, it was my very, very first year in undergrad. And I was interested in taking a course. And I guess this course was farther along where I was. So I was eager to get there. And there were some courses that I was taking that I wasn't thrilled about. So I called my advisor and I said, hey, there's this course that I'm interested in, and I would like to take it and kind of get rid of some of these courses that I'm not so interested. And she goes, oh, Mr. Smith, you can't do that. And I'm like, oh, why not? And she goes on to explain to me that, well, the course that you're currently in is actually a prerequisite for the course that you're trying to get to. And I remember saying, a pre-what? And she said, slowly, a prerequisite. She said, this course is a foundational step. It's actually a step you have to take first before you even get to that class that you're trying to get to. The Enduring Commentary tells us that acknowledging and being poor in spirit is an absolute prerequisite for even receiving the kingdom of heaven. On the flip side of that, it says, as long as we harbor illusions about our own spiritual resources, we'll never receive from God what we absolutely need to be saved. The kingdom of heaven is given to the poor. It's given to the despised publicans. See, we forget this. It's given to prostitutes. It's given to thieves. Those who are so poor, they know they can offer nothing. And watch this, they don't try. They cry for mercy, and they alone are heard. says one theologian, Carson. The more I thought about the way the enduring word is breaking down the poor in spirit, the more I thought about how much sense it makes why God opposes the proud. The poor in spirit, as I said earlier, are keenly aware that there's no room for pride when it comes to this first beatitude, to this first saying that Jesus would have been talking about. And it would have rang in the hearts of the people of God who have served him for many and for hundreds of years. They would have understood that Jesus, in fact, wasn't talking about anything of any type of agricultural or monetary value. These people would have understood that this had every single thing to do with humility. But even further than that, it had a lot to do with a person that wasn't afraid to worship, mainly on their face. The way the Enduring Word commentary breaks this down, this person who is poor in spirit would have to be willing and ready to cry out to God for anything that they need. And that kind of sounds cliche. It almost sounds easy. It almost can be like, Q, why are you saying that? Like, we kind of already know that. But sometimes we cry and we get on our face to God for things we can't do. But if it's something that we think we can do, we're not so humble. You see, the poor in spirit, they don't possess that attitude. On the contrary, they have the attitude that they can't accomplish anything without God. This can be annoying to some people because it could almost look like the poor in spirit don't believe in themselves. It could almost look like they have no confidence. On the surface, it could almost look like they don't believe in themselves that they could do anything. But in all actuality, they know that it's impossible for them to do anything on their own. That it's unwise for them to take steps without asking for God's help or even wise counsel. They're keenly aware that any step they may take may be detrimental to them, because at that moment, that step does not serve them as being poor in spirit. So it made me ask myself, has this been something I've been practicing? Now, I do have ways of checking myself and making sure that I'm doing these things. But if we think about this being Jesus's first long-standing sermon, and I mean, he could have led with anything to be an attention grabber. He chooses to lead with, "Blessed are those who know that they can't do anything without me." And it made me ask myself, has this been something that's been on the forefront of my heart? God asks me to do a lot of things at any given time, sometimes more than what I want to do. And I always make sure, am I asking God to help me in the next step that I'm going to take? It doesn't matter how many times I've done it. It doesn't matter if I have a skill for it. It doesn't matter if I could pull it off if I don't pray. The minute that I take that step and I don't ask for God's help, I've forfeited being poor in spirit. It can seem like because we're practiced in an area that we don't have to ask God for this help. And sometimes because God gives us skill, it could seem like we don't have to ask God for help in this area. But I've learned that even walking into meetings with my boss, walking into meetings with my mentors, it doesn't matter how many Sundays I get up here or if I go anywhere as a guest preacher. The minute I don't ask for the Lord's help, I've forfeited being the poor in spirit. If I go a little bit deeper before we get to communion, I could say, putting myself out there on the chopping block, I could say, it doesn't matter how fast a sermon comes to me. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting there and within 5 or 10 minutes, I could get something from the Lord and I could say, oh, this is what I'll preach. And I'll just go on and I'll start writing, and that's what I'll preach. The minute I decide to not ask the Lord for his help, I have forfeited being the poor in spirit. I take away from the fact that I serve a God that's interested in giving fresh manna. God never had the Israelites take their manna and save it for 2 weeks straight because he wasn't going to provide. In fact, he told them, don't even save anything till the next day because he was going to give them something new. And the minute I forget that, I could step into something so prideful, and not on purpose, but I could step into it because it's just easy for me. Because I just have the skill to do it. I don't have to think twice about it. But if I don't ask the Lord for his assistance, and if I don't ask the Lord to anoint me, if I don't ask the Lord to bless me, then I have in fact forfeited being the poor in spirit. And the Lord really dealt with me